All right, I'll start letting everyone in now.
Oh, hold on 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm ready.
All right, sounds good.
Relax. I'm not gonna tell them anything.
All right, welcome everyone to the 5th session of our Future MDs in STEM summer program. We are incredibly excited to have you all here as we wrap up week 2. So we're going to go right ahead and get started with Dr. Azan's presentation, and he will be going over how to apply as an international student. So if you have any questions for him, please be sure to either put it in the chat or raise your hand and he'll call on you if he has the time. But if not, then you can be sure to either reach out to him on Instagram or follow F1 Doctors, all of which the resources will be linking in our follow-up email as well as our follow-up announcement. So without further ado, we're going to get started with his segment and you can take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction. After all this time on Zoom, I still can't manage to figure out how to unmute myself, but really appreciate it. Not a doctor yet, still in medical school, have 3 more years to go, but hopefully that's something that is in the future. Thank you all for joining us today. So my name is Azan, and I am going to be talking to you a little bit about applying to medical school, but also more broadly health professional schools as an international applicant. And a little bit about me, I am currently at Harvard Medical School, and I am in a dual program. So I'm getting a medical degree from Harvard Medical School and also a master's in business administration from Harvard Business School. And I am also the founder for F1 Doctors, which is something that I will talk to you a little bit more about towards the end of the presentation. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to give you a couple of slides, tell you a little bit about a little bit of information, and we will hold off questions until the end. So I'm going to try to leave almost 15 minutes for questions at the end, if that works. But why don't we just get started? So a couple of things that I have to start off with in terms of disclosures. I have no financial disclosures. I think it's always just important to say I am not going to make any money from saying any of the stuff I'm going to say. I'm also not going to promote any sort of private organization. And also, I think another thing to mention is that everything that I'm going to tell you right now is unrepresentative of the school, of the views of Harvard Medical School. So the medical school does not know I'm doing this, but I am doing this because I want to share this information with you. But also, these are some of the tips that I've noticed throughout my time of applying. And so hopefully you'll be able to take away a lot from this, but please do not feel like everything I say means that Harvard Medical School also says the same thing. So let's jump into my story. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Tanzania. So that's in the east coast of Africa. I spent most of my life there, almost 18 years, and I went to high school there as well. The high school I went to was called Isamilo International School, Mwanza, which is in the small city off the coast of Lake Victoria. It's known as Rock City because it has great rock formations. And that's basically where I did high school. And in high school, I was one of those kids who was really interested in learning, really was one of those people who was really focused on academics. But I also did a ton of extracurriculars as well on the side. One of the biggest ones was I did theater. I loved to perform. I loved to get on stage and sing and dance, and that was me. And then on top of that, other extracurriculars that I did was that I worked a lot with the teachers and the administration as well, as sort of the student representative. And I also did some athletic sports such as swimming is basically what I did in high school as well. So those were some of the extracurriculars. I had volunteering as well. And that was my time in high school. And so at the end of high school, when it came to applying to colleges, um, my parents simply could not afford to send me to college. We came from a very low income family, and there was just absolutely no funds to send me off to a place of higher education. And that's why I think that's one of the big reasons as to why the colleges in the United States were so appealing, is because they had such large financial aid packages for students, for international students, as long as you got in. So as soon as you got in, they would look at all your financial information, and then they would decide whether or not you can afford to come here. And if you couldn't, then they would provide the financial support to do that. And so that's what happened. Is I got into a couple of colleges here in the US, and I decided on Yale, and I went to Yale for my bachelor's degree in 2013. And college was definitely a tough time, as you can imagine, as somebody who had never traveled outside of Tanzania and who had never left the country, to suddenly take a one-way flight to the United States and show up at college was definitely challenging. It was a lot of getting used to. And I think the first year was definitely the hardest. But after that, it definitely got a little bit easier. Once you had all the sort of logistical things set up, it got a little easier. But in the beginning, when it came to academics, I struggled with that as well. When it came to things like English courses, I had learned how to write essays very differently to the way that people wrote essays here. So that's something I struggled with as well. Emotionally, it was hard to be so far away from family. Um, and so it was quite a challenging experience, but I think I learned a lot from it and took away a lot from it. And in the last few years of college, there was actually this special program that allowed me to start a master's degree in college. So basically what that meant is that in my senior year of college, I actually started doing graduate level courses at the School of Public Health. And this special program meant that in 5 years, I could graduate with both my bachelor's and my master's in public health, as opposed to a 6-year program. So that was really appealing to me. It meant that I saved a whole year's worth of money and time as well. So I decided to do that. And so I think that brings me quite well onto the extracurriculars and the internships that I did throughout college, and as well as throughout my master's in public health. One of the things that I am really interested in is infectious diseases, and particularly malaria. So I really love to do research, and that was sort of a big component of my time in college. In my junior and senior year, I focused a lot of time on going into the lab, doing experiments, and came out with a couple of publications. So I think that was probably by far one of the big standouts on my application. But also on top of that, in my first 2 years of college, I was really interested in sort of working with the administration as I had done in high school. So I was a part of the Yale College Council. I did a little bit of shadowing, but most of my shadowing was done in Tanzania, which is where I shadowed doctors. And the reason for that is because I'm also interested in global health. So I made the case when I was applying to medical school that most of my shadowing was in Tanzania, because I wanted to see what the practice of medicine was like back home. And then the other internships that I did was I worked a little bit at the Global Malaria Program, which is at the World Health Organization in Switzerland. And I also did some consulting as well for a couple of months, really mostly just to learn about what it's like to be a rural farmer in Tanzania. And so that's what my consulting internship was. It was in Tanzania with a social development consulting firm. And I just wanted to, understand the mindset of what it's like to live in rural areas and not have access to healthcare. And also it paid really well. So that helped me sort of boost my finances a little bit. And I guess that brings us to today. In 2019, I started Harvard Medical School, and I am now in my second year of medical school, almost finishing up my second year. And earlier this year, I also applied to tag on a master's in business administration from Harvard Business School onto my degree. So I will be graduating with both a MD and an MBA in 5 years. So that's most of my story. Let's move on to sort of the next section, which is some of the reasons as to why I decided to come here to the United States. And I hope some of these will resonate with you as well. But for me, the most important thing was a higher education. I think my parents from a very young age really instilled this idea that an education was sort of this golden ticket to, the world. It meant that if I focused in on my education in high school, it meant that I could actually go anywhere with that. And it kind of worked out for me. And so I wanted to come here to the United States, particularly because a lot of some of the best colleges in the world exist here. And I wanted to really be a part of that space, and really get that higher education, something that I didn't feel like I could get for a long time. And I think that brings me on to my second point, which is the financial aid component. As a low income person from a low income family, there's no way I could have afforded college. But a lot of the colleges here in the United States have generous financial aid packages for students who come from low income families. And that was something that I was able to experience after receiving offers from numerous schools. I was able to see that, they're actually willing to bring students over and actually help pay for their education. And so that was a big draw for me to come here to the United States as well. The third reason is sort of research and opportunities as well. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my time in college was doing research on malaria. Now, malaria is one of those, predominant diseases in Tanzania that a lot of individuals get. And I, from a very young age, really wanted to understand the disease a little more, like really be at the forefront of developing, therapeutics or diagnostics for this disease, something that, was really close to home. And I strongly believe that coming here to the United States, where they had universities with, large budgets and a lot of research that were studying these diseases, I really wanted to be a part of that. I really wanted to be a part of sort of that discovery process. And so that's one of the other reasons as to why I came here, and also the opportunities. I felt that coming here to schools with lots of extracurriculars and lots of internships, as well as lots of opportunities to do different summer programs, I wouldn't have had that experience if I went elsewhere. So one of the greatest experiences I've had is actually a summer program that was offered at Yale, where I could just take language courses in a different country. So I basically went all the way to Paris in France for the summer, and the school helped pay for it to learn French. And so I think, that's just an example of an opportunity that I feel like I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So I'm really, truly grateful for that. And then the last point is this idea of knowledge exchange. So for me, the motivation has always been, and it still is, to gain a lot of knowledge and experience here and then return to Tanzania and implement some of this. I think there currently exists this information inequity, where there's a lot of knowledge here in the US. There's a lot of research that's happening, and there's a lot of things that are being discovered, but that information is not making its way to other countries, such as my home country of Tanzania. So I really saw it as an opportunity to be a bridge between the two countries, and be able to take some of that knowledge and go home and implement it. So that was one of the other reasons that I thought coming to the US was a good idea. And it was overall, it's paid off. It's been such a great experience. I feel like I've learned a lot, I've grown a lot. I've seen so much more of the world, more than I could have ever imagined. This is a picture of me right here in Philadelphia, riding a bike in the middle of college. This is one of those times that I just went on spring break with a couple of friends and just traveled across the Northeast. And that's something that, I'm truly grateful for, and I'm truly humbled that I've been able to experience that. And I don't think that a lot of these experiences that I would have had would have existed if I didn't come here for college. So let's sort of transition now into the next part of this talk, which will be sort of the common myths of applying as an international student. So the first thing that you want to remember as an international student who wants to go to a health professional school, there are certain paths that you have to take to actually get there. So let's talk about the two paths that currently exist. The first is through a US college path. So what that means is that you come here for college, get your bachelor's degree from here, and then you apply to medical school. And for a lot of medical schools here, that's sort of a big requirement, is that you need to have graduated with a bachelor's from a US college. There are some exceptions where I think they often may accept a bachelor's degree from a Canadian college, because the system is quite similar there. But I think predominantly most of the medical schools here actually require you to have some sort of US college degree. So that's one path. you get your college degree here, you go to medical school here, and then you practice here as a physician, you go through residency, and then you become an attending doctor here. The other path is slightly different. So the other path that other students often take is sort of coming in at the point of residency. So these are individuals who have done their college in a different country. They've also gone to medical school in a different country, and they may even be practicing doctors in a different country. They can apply directly into residency programs, which is where you get most of your training and you work for a hospital for a certain number of years before you can become a full licensed physician. So that is sort of like allows you to sort of come halfway or midway through that entire process of becoming a doctor here. And there are some individuals who do that. That path is definitely very different and has its own challenges. There are a limited number of residency programs in the United States, and a lot of them are trying to take students who graduate from medical schools here. So it is, it has a lot of challenges to come in at that pathway. And similarly, even if you do go to college here and you go to medical school here, there are also some challenges that exist, which include, as an international student, in my case, I will be applying to residencies as a foreign student as well, even though I've done a lot of my medical education here. So that could be also a little bit challenging because there's very few residency programs that offer international students the ability to come and train there, because it means that they have to sponsor your work visa. But it still is possible, and that is another path that exists. So these are sort of the two ways you can become a physician here in the United States. And that's something that you should keep in mind as you're planning this path. And that sort of brings me to the first myth that I definitely want to address, is that non-US citizens cannot be accepted to US health professional schools. Now, as you can tell, I am a testament that this is false, right? I am on an F1 visa. I am not a US citizen. I do not have a green card, but I'm still here in medical school. So I think that if you are a non-US citizen, yes, the path is challenging, and there's a lot of hurdles along the way, but it is, when it comes to sort of acceptance, it is possible, right? When it comes to being able to submit your application to a US medical school and having them look at it, it is possible. They will take a look at it. I think across the states, there's just over 40 medical schools, I believe, that will actually say on their website that we accept international students and we take international students. And so it is possible for you to actually go to medical school here. But not only medical school, you can also expand that broadly to any health professional school, whether it's nursing school, whether it's a physician assistant school, whether it's getting a doctor in osteopathic medicine, or whether it's like working in physical rehabilitation school. All those other schools also, there are schools that accept international students, and you could get any of those other degrees as well. So that's also something to consider. The second myth that exists is that no medical school will provide any sort of financial support. And right off the bat, I think, that is false once again. I would not be here at medical school. I've mentioned this multiple times, is that there's absolutely no way I could have afforded this education. But thanks to the generosity of the medical school, I'm actually able to be here and get this degree. And so there are some medical schools that will offer financial aid to their students, regardless of their citizenship status. But the number of medical schools that would actually do that is actually, quite a few. And a lot of them have been transitioning to something known as debt-free education. What that means is that if you are applying as a low-income student, and you don't have not only the money to pay for school, but also the money to pay for housing and for food and for all the other expenses that you have, they will not only help you pay for the school tuition part, they will also help you pay for the cost of living. So the housing, the food, and all the other things that you need to purchase. So there are some schools that do that as well. And so that's something to consider. And we'll talk a little bit more about financial aid and financing medical school in the next slide. So let's touch upon some of the tips for international applicants. So as international applicants, all of you are either considering this path or exploring this path. So how is it that you can actually stand out in this process? So we talked earlier about how having a college degree may be a requirement if you're going to be applying to medical school here in the United States. But how do you stand out as an applicant to these US medical schools? And the first thing that you definitely want to do is you want to create your story. And what that means is that each and every single one of you comes from a very different background, has a very unique perspective, and are very different in your backgrounds. And so what you need to do is you need to actually bring that to the forefront of your application. You need to actually sort of talk about it extensively when you're applying and not necessarily shy away from that. I've actually met a few international students who are sort of scared to share sort of their background and what it was like growing up in a different country, and what it was like to experience healthcare in a different country. Those are all the reasons as to why you want to be a health professional. And so it's important that you actually talk about those and bring those up in your application. So let me tell you a little bit about sort of me. I went through this little crisis in college where I didn't really know how I would stand out as an applicant in medical school. And so what I did was I basically just sat down and I thought to myself, who is Azan at his core, right? What makes me me? And at the end of the day, you can summarize it into one line. I am a kid from Tanzania who loves infectious diseases. That's basically me. And I was able to distill it down to this one sentence. And if that is who I am at my core, how is it that I showcase that to the admissions committee? And so the way I did that was I did research on malaria, as I mentioned earlier. It's one of those diseases that I found truly fascinating. And I did a ton of research on that. I worked at the global malaria program. So still on the same vein, trying to showcase to the admissions officers that, hey, I love infectious diseases, but I also love public health and health policy by working at the World Health Organization. And then I worked in social development, and that I tied that into the experience. And I said that I worked in this experience because it really taught me to think from the perspective of a rural farmer and how they don't have access to healthcare and how they often have to spend all of their savings just to, when somebody falls sick. And so really tying in all of these experiences. And then when an admissions officer would actually look at my application, they would say, okay, this is a kid from Tanzania who likes infectious diseases and has done all of these experiences that align with that one statement that in some ways identifies you. And so it's important that you take a step back and you really think about what are you interested in? What do you want to pursue? What are you passionate about? And then really making sure you have experiences that tie into that. Now, that's not to say that you can't do experiences outside of that. So one of the things I did in college was I sang in the Yale Russian chorus. I love to sing. And so I sang in a choir and I toured across the US. And that did not sort of fit into the statement that I just mentioned, that Azan is a kid from Tanzania who loves malaria. But it's another extracurricular that sort of is good for my mental health. So you could still do those experiences. Don't sort of let them go, because that's also what makes you different. But make sure that a lot of the experiences that you're doing are sort of tied into your motto or your mission. The second thing that I want to bring up is you need to plan meticulously. As an international student here in the United States, you don't have the freedom to just say that, hey, I'm not going to plan what I'm going to do this summer. I'm pretty sure an experience will pop up in June, and I'll do that. That's not how life works for international students, right? As students who are on visas here, we need to plan way in advance what we're going to do the summer after, right? So in my sophomore year in November, I was already thinking about what is my summer internship going to be. And a lot of the applications are quite early as well. So you really need to get in on that because at the same time, if you do get a summer internship, you need to apply for legal permission to actually do that internship. You need to apply for an optional practical training. And so that application needs to go out in February for you to get the permission to do it in June. So as you can see, the timeline, if you're applying in February to get the legal permission to do an internship in June from the US government, you need to have your internship set by December at the latest, right? So you've got to be thinking about this. You need to plan as to what your next steps are going to be. What is your next year going to look like? What classes are you going to take? When you graduate from college, are you going to take a gap year? Are you going to do research? What is lacking in your application? Do you have enough research, volunteering, shadowing? all these different components are important to apply to medical school. And it's important that you actually put these pieces together before you fully submit your application. And you need to plan way in advance when you're going to do these things. The third tip is the exam. So standardized tests are a part of how you excel here in the US. I'm going to be completely honest. I suck at standardized testing, right? It is not my strong suit. I hate the fact that it's like so sped up and I have to respond each question. I only have a minute to read the entire prompt and answer. I also come from a background where English is not my strongest suit. So I struggle on standardized exams, but it's something that exists here in the US. If I ever get into power someday, I will remove them, but that's not the case right now. And so you just really need to practice and get better at it. So for the MCAT specifically, which is the exam that you need to apply to medical school, you can take that at any point during your college years or even after you graduate doing your gap year. But that is an exam that you need to do. And you can do it here in the United States, but also there's locations across the world that you can also take your MCAT. So I was in Tanzania for my gap year and I took the MCAT in South Africa. So I actually had to fly out to South Africa and take the MCAT. Not an ideal situation. Ideally you can avoid that and you're here in the United States and you can take it here, but worst case scenario, that's something that you may have to do. So standardized testing is hard. One of the hardest sections that I struggle with is known as the CAR section, or the critical analysis. Oh, I'm forgetting sort of the acronym for what it stands for, but it's basically where you read passages about different topics. Could be philosophy, could be economics, and you have to answer questions about it. So it's really challenging because you need to really focus in and pay attention. It's like reading comprehension is basically what it is, but it's a really hard reading comprehension. I hated that section. It was my worst one. But if you are considering to take the MCAT and you know that English is not necessarily your strongest suit, I recommend that you do CARS passages every single day. So sign up to some website that sends you passages every single day, read them and practice. The only way you can really get good at these exams is through practice. And what I've learned through a lot of my friends who did great on the MCAT was that it's really a skill. Taking standardized exams is a skill. It is not a measure of how much you know. And I think I want to re-emphasize that as well, right? You are smart individuals. You will have learned all the information and you will know it like the back of your hand, but you will take the standardized exams and you may see that you may not get the scores that you want. And the reason for that is because these exams are a skill. You need to learn how to read a passage really quickly, pick up on the important points, and then go through the answers systematically and say, nope, 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 this is the one, and then move on, right? It's a skill and you need to get better at it. And the only way that happens is through practice. I'll also touch a little bit upon writing your personal statement. When you are writing your personal statement for medical school, once again, make sure that it is about you. Make sure it is tailored to you and your story, and it is unique. That's something that you definitely want to bring out in your essay. The essay does hold a lot of weight, in my opinion, as well, because it shares, your journey all the way up to medical school in the U.S. So you are an international student who's gone through a lot of stuff and a long winding road to actually get here. And you need to share that story in 700 words to an admissions officer. It's hard. So you're going to have to write multiple drafts, but make sure that you have people read it. Make sure that it also talks a little bit about some of the experiences that you've done in a way that's sort of smooth and it doesn't feel sort of jarred. So that's something to consider as well. Next up, let's move on to financial planning. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but let's talk about funding for all health professionals. And you can see here, I have this little diagram. For all health professional schools, medical school, nursing school, PA school, here's how you can afford it as an international student. So let's break it down as to how it is financially feasible to go to some of these schools. The first is the financial aid or the need bucket. And these are medical schools across the US that I mentioned earlier who are going debt-free, who are providing financial aid. This is money that is given to you to pay for the tuition and to pay for your cost of living as well. Some of them will only cover the tuition, and then you may have to find another way to pay for the cost of living. But there are schools that are going in this direction, and they do exist. They are some of the hardest schools to get into, but that's something to also put on your radar, that if you are able to get into some of these top schools, they will provide the financial means for you to attend. The next bucket is the merit scholarships. So for individuals who have really high GPAs and really high MCAT scores, you can actually get some of these merit scholarships even as an international student from some schools. A really great example is the University of Pennsylvania has this special merit scholarship called the Global Scholars or the Global Leaders Scholarship for medical school. And this is offered to students and it covers the entire cost of education at University of Pennsylvania Medical School. So definitely they exist out there. You just need to look for them, search for them. UCLA also has a great scholarship like that that's also merit-based. If you are interested in some of these options, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but F1 Doctors has an Excel document on their website that has all of the financial aid policies, all the medical schools that international students can apply to, and their respective financial aid policies. So definitely take a look at that. The third bucket is an institutional loan. So this is where the medical school will say, we're not going to give you money for free for you to attend, but here's a loan that you can take out from the medical school, and we are giving it to you, so you don't need to get a US cosigner, and it has a really good interest rate because we trust you. You're here at the medical school, you're going to graduate, and you're going to do great things, and then you'll pay us off whenever you have the money to pay us off. So these are great loans that the medical school provides you, and a lot of medical schools also have this as well. They have great interest rates, and you don't have to start paying them off right away because they know that you're in medical school, you're learning. You don't have to start paying them off until after you graduate. Great loans. And the last one is sort of these private lenders. So there are private companies that exist that give out loans to international students without a cosigner. And if you're interested in which companies those are, look at our website, f1doctors.com. But these are companies that have loans for international students, but they're often at very high interest rates, and you may have to start paying them off even while you're in medical school. So I have one of these loans that I took out for my master's in public health. And it's something that I'm paying off in medical school, even though I'm not really working or making any money. So it's not the ideal situation, but it's also another financial option for you to afford your dream of becoming a health professional. And then the last tip that I want to bring up is the world is your oyster. So you're all international students, right? If you do come here for college, and let's say you're looking for a summer experience, don't feel like you have to be tied to the United States, right? You can go anywhere, really. You could go back home and do a summer experience there. You could go to one of your neighboring countries and do a summer experience there as well. Truly just think about how there's so many other countries out there. There's so many experiences in a lot of different countries. Just look online and explore and research. Do your Googling to find some of these experiences that exist in other countries, right? That you may have the ability to go to just for a summer internship. So think about that. Even when you're applying to medical school, as I told you earlier, I did a lot of my shadowing in Tanzania, right? You could do your shadowing elsewhere in the world as well. And if being a global health physician is something that you're interested in as well, then that is something that you should share in your application, and the medical school will actually look at it and say, you know what, this makes sense. If you want to be a global health physician and a lot of your experiences are back home or also in a different country entirely, that makes sense, right? Just make sure it aligns with your application and with your goals. But consider that there are experiences that are out there for summer internships, for study abroads, for taking a semester abroad in all these other countries that you should definitely explore. And so I want to just end on this slide on F1 Doctors. So in March of last year, I started F1 Doctors with friends from Brown Medical School. And they are also international students who are in medical school. And basically what it is, it's an online mentorship platform. So this is a platform that's geared mostly for students who are in college here in the United States. So for students who are in high school, it's kind of far removed from the experiences that we have had. So all of us on this platform are medical school students, or we're in dental school, or we're in PA school, or we're in nursing school, or we're in DO school. So we're all in sort of the part of our career where, you know, we're about to graduate from a health professional school. So for high school students, it's so far removed that it's hard for us to actually provide any sort of advice or guidance, right? But this platform is geared mostly for international students who are in college here in the United States. These are the students that we can actually provide more specific mentorship and guidance to, because we've been through that process recently as well. So it's an entirely free platform online if you're applying to health professional schools. And currently we have over 130 mentors. I think it's now 150 mentors. And all of us are students, right? We're all in school right now. So if you do consider using this platform, remember that, you know, we're all still learning and we are quite busy. I'm currently on my surgery rotation. So right after this, I'm going to jump into scrubs and go into the operating room. So we're all currently in a busy part of our lives. So when you're reaching out to mentors, please keep that in mind, right? Don't just spam a mentor 7 times because, you know, we will flag you if you do that. But keep that in mind. Find one mentor, read their profiles, and find one that actually resonates with you, one that you can truly connect with, whether they're from the same home country, or whether they have a path that, you know, that you find truly interesting, or a path that you want to go down. Reach out to that mentor, send them an email, and then ask them for a time that works for them to, you know, to just talk to you for 30 minutes. And hopefully that's able to, you know, give you a lot of insights into the process and into sort of what it's going to be like if you were to become a health professional here in the United States. We have mentors from over 44 countries. We've served over 800 mentors. And so over 800 international college students have actually used our platform. So that's something that we're definitely really proud of. So that's the website. We're pretty prominent on Instagram and Facebook. On Facebook, we have this great thing where it's a sort of a group discussion page where you can ask a question to all of us, and anyone can actually respond. So I think it's a great way to get some of your questions answered as well if I don't get to them later today. And then we also have an Instagram. We're doing a lot of work on the Instagram. We're constantly posting tips and suggestions. And so feel free to follow us there as well. I think it's overall a great platform. This is something that has never existed in the past, right? So for all these years, international students have been doing this on their own, and they really haven't had the support. So this platform is truly one of those things that changes that. We are giving non-US citizens who are applying to healthcare professional schools the mentorship and the guidance and the support that they need to go through that process. So feel free to check that out. And I think I am done, and I will now take some questions. Feel free to also follow me on Twitter. I do a lot of my posting about this sort of subject, something that I'm really passionate about on Twitter as well. So let's take a look at this this chat to see if there are any questions. Feel free to send them in as well. Okay, so we have one we have one for how did you cope with the challenges? So that's actually a great question. So coming here to the US was tough. You know, initially I came to this foreign land with no cell phone, no bank account, you know, absolutely nothing to my name, just 2 suitcases full of stuff. And it was, honestly, it was a lot of the upperclassmen and upper class women that had been through this process that really helped guide me. So when you go to any sort of college, there are going to be international students who are juniors and seniors who have been through this process and who know what you're experiencing. And I feel like those individuals were by far some of my strongest support network that I had in college, because they were the ones who sat down with me and told me, you know, this is what you need. This is how you apply for a social security number. This is how you apply for this special program that allows you to do a summer abroad in Paris for the summer. So they were the ones who really guided me through this process. So you should definitely reach out to the individuals who've gone through it, who are above you, who are juniors or who are seniors as well. The international school office is going to also tell you how to get all these logistical things done as well. For my lack of English knowledge and ability to write essays, I relied heavily on the writing tutors. So at all colleges in the US, they're going to be individuals who are paid to be there to help you write better essays. And that is their job. And I used them extensively. I also used a lot of the tutors extensively. So that's one thing that really helped, allowed me to get through some of my English courses, which I really did not enjoy at all. But you have to ask for the help. I think that's sort of the big takeaway here, is that ask for help, right? Don't feel like you have to go through this on your own. There are people out there who are going to be willing to, to guide you through this process. All you have to do is actually just reach out to them. The other thing to also consider is for tutors and for academics, it's important to go to, to tutor hours or go to office hours to meet with your professor after class is over, or, during the week, to say that, hey, I don't understand this problem set. Can you please explain it to me? Those are important things that, you have to take out time to actually do, but they're really helpful and really beneficial. For sort of the mental health challenges, the inability to actually travel home, I could only go home once a year. That was really hard. I didn't have family here in the United States either. So it's not like I, could meet someone or go to someone's house either. So that was definitely challenging. So I think one thing I did was I just call my parents every single day. I'm also an only child, which is another reason as to why I guess my parents call me every day, but that was one of the ways in which I stayed sane throughout the entire process. And it's a good reminder of like why you're doing this. The fact that you're here, you are here sort of as a representation of your family, your community, your country. And so, it's important that you take full advantage of this experience. I did not have a therapist during college, but that's something that I feel like I should have had during college as well. I think that at times there's often the stigma around mental health and having someone to talk to about what you're experiencing. That should, that we should break that down completely, right? I feel like if you are struggling with the process and you just need someone to talk to, sign up for a therapist at your college to just explain to them, what are you going through? What are you experiencing? And hopefully they're able to just listen and provide some sort of suggestions. So those are the challenges that I experienced, and that's sort of how I coped as well. And I hope that answers your question. Yeah, somebody said that they have to fly to Miami for the HamCat this September from Puerto Rico. So I feel you. That's definitely make sure this is going to be hard, but try to get there a couple of days beforehand so that you can actually get some good rest. And the mistake I did was that I studied until the very last minute because that's just me as a person. The MCAT is a 7-hour exam. Don't, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while, but just take a break. The day of your exam, don't wake up early in the morning and study. That's what I did. And it was just not a good idea. That's as I mentioned, standardized testing, it tests not only your ability to read quickly, it also tests your endurance. Can you sit in one spot for 5 hours and do this whole exam? Can you still pay attention when it is 4 hours and 45 minutes into your exam? Are you still able to remain focused? And that is a skill that you just have to get better at as well. And practice is the only way you can do that. So I feel for you. Make sure you take a couple of days before your exam to just take a break and to get in the right headset. How is applying to college in the US different from applying to med school as an international student? So I think it's predominantly the same. I think they're both, when you're applying to college or when you're applying to medical school, there's still a common application that you have to fill out. There's going to be a personal statement that you write. There's going to be secondaries that each school asks you to write. I feel like that was a big part of applying to college as well. And that still also happens in medical school. All the medical schools will send you a set of other questions that they want you to respond. The application is pretty similar. It asks you for like your income status, like your all your education, your transcripts. Letters of recommendation is something that you need as well. For medical school, the letters of recommendation need to come from like individuals that you've worked with, similar to when you're applying to college. For me, I had my research mentor, a professor who taught me a class. I had the person that I worked with on my internship also write me a letter of recommendation. So it has to come from very different people, and it has to showcase different aspects of you, right? So you in the classroom is going to be very different from you working at an internship in a consulting firm who is like working really hard to make sure that you get all the right information, versus you in the classroom who's asking good questions and paying good attention. So, you know, those are the things that you want to showcase, and you want to make sure that your letter of recommendation show a different part of you. But I think overall, I think mostly it's pretty similar, in my opinion. Do we have time for any more questions, or should we stop right there?
We have time for one more question.
We have time for one more question. Okay, I'm just going to go in order. I apologize if this is not your question. What should one keep in mind while in undergrad, regardless of nationality, citizenship, to get into medical school? So I think that's sort of all the tips that I mentioned earlier. You know, you definitely need to keep in mind that you're here on a visa as well. So you always have to make sure that you are staying sort of within the legal aspects of what you're allowed to do, right? I think that is probably the biggest piece of advice I have, regardless of where you come from. You got to make sure that you're staying within your legal status. What that means is that when you're here on campus, you're not working an off-campus job, because you can't do that, right? When you're here, you're not working more than 20 hours a week, because you can't do that, right? And you will get flagged. So whatever you do, do not jeopardize your status being here in the US. If your long-term goal is to be here, go to medical school here and be a part of this community, you need to always make sure that you're sticking to the rules and the regulations, right? Any internship in the summer needs authorization from the US government, right? Unless it's some sort of volunteering. But I'm not an immigration lawyer, so you need to look up all this information on your own and make sure that you're constantly communicating with your international office about what you're able to do and what you're not. So regardless of citizenship or nationality, definitely keep that in mind. Yeah, and I think that's it. Unless I could do another question too. It's entirely up to you.
I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll
Okay.
Thank you for.
We will do one last one. I think we're almost at the end. How do you keep yourself motivated through medical school, through all the struggles, and what's the best skill? Those are the last two questions, so I'll just do them both. What keeps me motivated throughout medical school? I think the things that I have experienced in the past is probably what keeps me motivated. The fact that there are so many individuals out there in this world who just can't afford basic healthcare, right? I think that's what keeps me motivated every single day, right? Like at the end of the day, you know, there's global warming, there's war, there's famine, there's all these horrible diseases. Like I just want to try to make a small difference, right? And if that means that I can go into an underserved area and have a patient, talk to them, see them, and provide the care that they need, like that to me is the one thing that motivates me every single day. Like I just want to be able to make a difference in the lives of individuals, right? And it's basically that. I think that's what keeps me motivated. Coming from a low income background as well, and being first generation, my parents didn't go to college. That's also a big motivation to be able to break out of the cycle of poverty, right? I was born into this, and you know, the goal is so that my parents can actually get to a point where they're comfortable because of all the hard work that I've put in. So that's another big motivation for me as well. And the biggest skill that I've learned throughout this whole process, I think, has been just coming here to the US has really taught me sort of the critical thinking, I think. Just the ability to take a problem and to break it down and to also think of solutions. I think that's one skill that I've been able to pick up from my consulting experience, but also from coming here and being a part of seminars where you have to actually, you know, think critically about the information that's being presented to you, and also sort of share it with all your classmates in a way that's eloquent enough that they can actually understand it. So public speaking as well as critical thinking, I think, are two things that I've picked up on while I've been here. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you so much to MedStem Powered for having me here, and good luck to all of you in this process.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again for coming to speak to us. We have linked our thank you form, so if you are interested in saying thank you to him for coming out to speak to us today, you're more than welcome to fill out that form, and then we'll be sending that to you as soon as our students fill that out. We'll also be linking all of F1 Doctor's resources in your social media and our announcements so kids can catch up with you if they choose to. So with that, thank you once again for coming to take the time and speak to us today. It was incredibly helpful, and I know this is definitely a lot of information that I would have benefited from too. So thank you once again, and we wish you the best on your medical school journey.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Bye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye. Alrighty. So with that, we are going to now transition to our next workshop. So Alex, who is our co-director of research, will be running his mock triaging workshop. So we'll let him take it away.
Thanks, Davina. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, let me know if you guys can see that.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, good morning for me, but wherever you are, hi everyone. As Davina said, I'm going to be running the mock triage workshop. So this presentation is just going to give you a really basic overview of what triaging actually is, and then it's also going to give some kind of mock scenarios where you guys can try your hand at actually triaging fictional patients. So to begin, what actually is triage and what is triaging? So that's a term that you might have heard thrown around before, but triaging is just this process that is used by hospitals and emergency rooms and other healthcare systems to kind of determine the order in which all of their patients should be treated. And they do so by looking at how urgent and how severe the conditions of each patient are. So you can think of it kind of like ranking each patient, if there are a lot of patients, ranking which order they should be treated, again, based on how urgent and how severe their conditions are. And so you can imagine that this process is really useful when there are a large number of patients that need to be treated, like during mass casualty incidents or even during busy hospital hours when there's a lot of people in emergency rooms, and physicians and nurses need to figure out, how do we treat all these patients, and then that they use triage to rank them and determine that order. So how do they actually rank them? They use sort of this system where there are several different categories that when patients come in, they see a triage nurse, and then those patients, based on their urgency and severity, they're tagged into a specific category. And here we have 5 categories listed, and different healthcare systems might use different triage categories, but the general overview and the general kind of gist of each category kind of remains the same across all hospitals and healthcare systems. So at the top, at the most severe, we have what's known as unsalvageable, which is typically the black color. And this is basically where the patient's not breathing and can be thought of as essentially deceased. So no amount of medical attention is expected to restore signs of life in that patient. So again, that patient is deceased. And then a step lower, we have critical or red. So the patient is still living, but they have a really life-threatening condition and essentially they're severely unstable. And so physicians will tag, or triage nurses will tag patients that need to be seen really immediately and that will often require extensive interventions like intubation. And then patients that are tagged in this category could also be unresponsive or in respiratory distress. So their breathing rate might be extensively high, or they might be declining in mental status. So if a triage nurse is asking them very simple questions and they cannot answer them, that might be a sign of really a life-threatening condition. So they will be tagged red. And then the next 3 categories We have emergent and urgent, and these two categories are kind of the same, and a lot of healthcare systems actually group these categories together, so they're only one color in their triage process, but we decided to split it up here just for clarity's sake. So we have the next one, we have emergent, which we have as orange. And this is a patient who has a potentially life-threatening condition. And so they should be seen as immediate as possible. So if not immediately, they should be seen at least within 10 minutes. And then we'll often need, again, testing or medication. And any delay in care is harmful to the patient. So medical staff will prioritize these patients as well after the critical patients. And then the next one we have is urgent, which we have listed as yellow. And this is someone who has a condition that is acute. So their condition came on really suddenly, but not necessarily severe and not necessarily life-threatening, but still kind of significant. And so they should be seen urgently, within 30 minutes to at most a few hours, and might require some testing or medication. And medical staff will expect to discharge, so release the patient after receiving medical attention. And then the least kind of severe category is what's known as non-urgent or walking wounded, and this is often green. And this is where the patient is stable and not severe, and they don't need to be quickly seen and are expected to require kind of minimal to no testing or medication, or at least the interventions that they need aren't super significant. And these patients are expected to be discharged since their conditions aren't that severe. So yeah, these are the kind of categories that we have listed. In most triage processes, the categories are sort of the same. There are some slight differences in names and colors, but this is kind of the general idea of how patients are sorted in the process. And I see we have a hand up. Do we want to answer questions?
Feel free, feel free to kind of answer questions as they come up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand, speak out loud, interrupt me, or put in the chat, whatever you feel like. So I think we have a hand up from Claudia.
Well, hello, hi.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask, is this kind of system applied to the US system or also other countries regarding the triage? Yeah,
so triage is used all across the world in all healthcare systems across in different countries. This is kind of the categories that I know best that most hospitals systems in the US use, but triage is definitely used all across the world. But again, there are some slight differences in categories, but yeah, it is used across the world. It's a pretty universal thing. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm gonna move on. So now we're gonna go into the mock triage part of this workshop. And so you're gonna play the role of the triage nurse who, again, is the first person to see patients and actually does the sorting and the tagging of the patients. And then you can try your hand at assessing and triaging kind of these fictional people. And so we're going to give you a scenario, and then it's your job to kind of figure out which color or which category they should be put in. And feel free to put that in the chat, and then we'll see what the correct answer is after. Oh, and we have another question. How can you differ from critical and emergent patients? So if we go back. So critical, I like to think of it as those are the patients that are 100% need to be seen now, because if they aren't seen now, then their chance of surviving is basically minimal to none. And emergent patients are patients that have a very severe condition, but the medical staff will see it as their condition is severe, but they don't need to be seen as right away as if they are a critical patient, I should say. So their condition is really severe, but they can hold off for a couple of minutes being treated if there are more critical patients that need to be seen first. So I should mention that the tagging of patients is actually often is kind of dependent on how many different patients are trying to be seen at the same time. So for example, if I have one patient that I see as critical and someone that I see as kind of sort of has a severe condition, but again, can hold off a few minutes, I'll label that second patient as emergent. But if that critical patient if I only have one patient that has sort of a severe condition, then I'll put them in critical, since I don't need to treat someone else first. So it's kind of dependent on who's in the emergency room or who needs to be treated at the same time. But that's kind of the difference between critical and emergent, is one that needs to be seen now, and emergent is the patient that needs to be that can be seen a little bit after the critical patient, but still needs to be seen quickly. That's kind of the main difference between the two. And then we have another question. Could you repeat when the triage system is used? Yeah, so I'll go back to the first slide. So the triage system is mostly used and is really helpful when there are a large number of patients that need to be treated. You can imagine if you have 20 people coming into the emergency room at once, medical staff might be overwhelmed and they might be like, how do we treat all these people at once? And so that's when the triage system is really used, is to rank and categorize and order all of these patients and the order in which they should be treated. Other instances when triage is actually really helpful is, for example, mass casualty incidents, so like natural disasters or things like that, where the emergency medical team on site will also rank and try and triage all of the people there to make sure that people are getting care in the most efficient way. So I hope that answered that question. Okay. So back to the mock triage. Okay, and then we have another question. How do you cope if there is 2 or more critical patients at the same time? That's a great question, because that's often a problem that a lot of healthcare systems face. And it's really dependent on what kind of resources are available at that specific location, at that specific hospital or that specific emergency tent. So if you do get 2 or more critical patients at the same time, medical staff will try and treat them both at the same time if there are resources available. If there's enough medical equipment and medical staff available, they'll try and treat them at the same time. But if not, and this is sort of one of the hard parts about medicine, is that if there aren't enough resources available, they are going to have to kind of make a decision on who to treat first based on, one, who has the most chance of surviving, and 2, one, who has the most chance of surviving, and 2, whose condition is the most severe. So that's kind of the trade-off that medical staff and physicians have to make in that situation. And we'll see later on in the mock triage portion that there's a situation there where you kind of have to decide whether or not it's worth treating one patient over the other. And that's kind of hard to say, but that's the reality of medicine in that situation. Okay. So we're going to go into our first patient, our first fictional patient. And again, feel free to put the what category you think that this patient should be tagged in the chat. So patient 1, we have a 14-year-old male at the scene of a natural disaster who walked into the emergency tent with a broken arm. You guys are quick with the answers. But I'll finish reading. His vital signs are all normal, all other extremities are undamaged, and he's fully aware of the situation and does not appear to be in any distress. So I don't even think I need to give you guys time because you're really quick with that. Yep, the correct answer category is green. So patient 1 would often be tagged as non-urgent because he's walking around the scene with an apparent singular injury. And again, this is otherwise known as walking wounded. So care does not need to be immediate at all for this patient's safety. Okay, patient 2. So at the scene of another natural disaster, a 73-year-old man is found lying under debris with several lacerations showing on his outer body, and brain matter is visible on the top of his head, and he is also unresponsive. So what category? So I see some blacks, and I do see some reds. Give you guys a minute. More blacks, more reds. Okay. So the correct answer in this case was black, actually. So this patient would be tagged as unsalvageable because he has clearly suffered a wound that no individual can survive or any amount of medical treatment or care can alleviate. So if we go back, there is brain matter that is visible on the top of his head, which leads us to believe that there's some type of skull fracture or some sort of open wound in his skull that has contributed to his unresponsiveness. And that is a very often unsurvivable wound. And yeah, so this is important to note. The man was 73 years old and age is taken into consideration for triage, but in this case, no individual of any age can survive sort of this open head wound that this patient had. So at the scene of a natural disaster, while in some cases, if there are enough hospital resources available, maybe that hospital might tag this patient as red and try and save him. But since this is a scene of a natural disaster, this patient would actually be categorized as deceased or black or unsalvageable. But good job, guys. All right, patient 3. So a police officer is wheeled into the emergency room with a gunshot wound in her left shoulder. The bullet is suspected to remain in her body, and the patient complains of tingling in her arm, and blood loss is significant. So she now begins to shift in and out of consciousness, and importantly, she has a history of deep vein thrombosis, and she takes a blood thinner medication for it, and she also states that she smokes daily. So what category? I'm seeing a lot of reds, some orange. Nice. Okay. All right. So in this case, you guys are all correct. The category is red. So patient 3 would be tagged as critical. And yes, Hamza is correct. Blood loss is significant. So that's a main reason why she is tagged as red. So yeah, she has suffered a major wound that is life-threatening if left untreated. And so this is also another important thing to note. During triage, a patient's medical history is taken into account, and her history of taking blood thinners and smoking further increases her risk of serious complications from her injury. And so the idea of taking blood thinners is really important when we look at blood loss because we don't want her to bleed out anymore. So yeah, care must be given relatively immediately for the patient's safety. So that's why she's categorized as critical. So nice job, everyone. Okay, patient 4. A 57-year-old female enters the emergency room on a wheelchair with a deformed tibia and fibula. The patient cannot walk on her own and states that she has some ongoing pain in the affected area. Patient's vital signs are normal and she does not appear to be in any distress. All right, so we get a mix of colors here. We have some green, yellow, orange, more yellows, green, maybe yellow. Awesome. Lots of yellows, actually. Okay. All right, so we categorize this patient as yellow, so as urgent. So she's not labeled as walking wounded since she actually cannot walk. And her injury is actually kind of significant in that she does feel pain, but she is still mentally aware. So she's not as urgent, or sorry, not as severe. And the condition is not potentially life-threatening, but she should still be seen swiftly for her comfort and for her safety. And yes, the tibia and fibula are in the leg. That was important to note, but yeah. Good job, everyone. Okay, patient 5. A family shows up to the emergency room with their 4-month-old daughter whom they believed consumed a half half a bottle of aspirin pills. The baby apparently climbed out of the portable crib during nap time and somehow reached an open bottle of baby aspirin. The patient is quiet and breathing is shallow. Quick pulse changes are noted. The patient is drooling and has occasional tremors or convulsions. All right, I'm seeing a lot of red, black or red. Cool. Oh, and we also got this comment. Also, deformed tibia and fibula could cause massive tissue damage and internal bleeding if left untreated. Important to note. So she might be moved up to orange in that case. All right, I'm seeing a lot of red, black, red, overdose. Okay. So in this case, this patient would often be categorized as red or critical. So you guys are all correct, given the patient's exhibited symptoms. So for example, shallow breathing and convulsions, it's clear that the baby needs to be treated immediately. And yeah, chemical toxicity or overdose, especially for newborns, has to be handled really fast in order to protect the baby in the immediate and their long-term health. Yeah. So awesome job, everyone. Okay. At the scene of another mass casualty incident, I don't know why I have listed so many mass casualty incidents, a 35-year-old man is found with no apparent injuries. He does not seem to have a pulse and is unresponsive to commands and questions. Ooh, lots of blacks. We've come to a consensus. All right, I think everyone's saying black. Anyone care to disagree? Okay. So yes, everyone's saying black, and that is correct. This patient, yes, this patient does not have a pulse. So patient 6 would be tagged as unsalvageable. And this is another important note. Since this is a mass casualty incident with many people seeking medical attention, resuscitation cannot likely be performed. And so this is a key difference between triaging in the field during mass casualty incidents and triaging in an emergency room. So in the field, in mass casualty incidents, resuscitation is often not performed, but in hospitals where there are more resources available, yes, if this isn't a mass casualty incident, such as in the hospital or emergency room, CPR or defibrillating him might be possible. But yeah, in this case, he's most definitely unsalvageable. That is correct. So yeah, there's a distinction between on the field and in like, for example, a hospital setting where there might be more resources, where a patient similar to this patient might be tagged as critical and the medical staff might try and save. So in this case, the patient is deceased. Okay, and for our last patient, a 16-year-old male shows up to the emergency room with 2nd and 3rd degree burns across 80% of his body. Patient's vitals are highly elevated and he is slipping in and out of consciousness. What do we see? What do we say? Seeing a lot of reds, orange or yellow, orange. Interesting. More reds. Red or orange. Switching to red. Okay, I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get your votes in. Some more reds. Okay, so in this case, and everyone or most people might be confused, but this patient would actually be categorized as orange or yellow, just in this scenario. So patient 7 would be tagged as emergent or urgent. And while his burns are obviously life-threatening, and yes, they are covering 80% of his body, this patient is not tagged as critical since he may not survive his injuries entirely. And so this is what we were talking about earlier when someone asked the question, what if there's 2 critical patients that need to be treated? So in this case, the emergent or urgent categories allow this patient to be seen quickly, but without taking the emergency room resources for a patient or for another critical patient who might have a higher chance of surviving. So yeah, I know it might be a little bit confusing, but in this, again, this goes back to the question, what if there are two critical patients that, or two patients that have really severe conditions, what do you do then? And so in this case, this patient, since the burns are second and third degree and they're covering 80% of his body, this patient might not survive his injuries entirely. And so tagging this person as orange or yellow will allow him to be seen quickly without taking the emergency room resources for another critical patient who might have a higher chance of surviving. So this will allow that other patient that is critical to be treated first, and then him, and then you know, his life or survivability would be determined from there. And so in this case, care would be given as immediate as resources become available. And so we have a couple questions. He's not tagged red because he can die easily because of his injuries. So yes, that is precisely why he isn't tagged red in this case. Because, well, I guess we should have listed in the prompt that there are, for example, think about if this patient is coming into the emergency room with, at the same time as another critical patient who, let's say, has a condition that is a little bit more severe than his, or I should say, has a condition that, if treated quickly, would allow that other patient to survive, or the odds of them surviving are relatively high and relatively kind of good. So he's not tagged red precisely because he could die easily of his injuries. And if there are two critical patients that come into the emergency room at the same time, medical staff will have to weigh who has a higher chance of survivability. And in this case, since he might not have a high chance of survivability, the medical staff will prioritize giving the emergency room resources to another patient who will have higher odds of surviving. So in this kind of scenario, that's why. But if there was no critical patient, then yes, he would probably be tagged as red. Another question, but couldn't we argue that this isn't necessarily a natural disaster or big accident, so he should still be prioritized? That is true. Yeah, that is true. But I guess in this scenario, we just wanted to point out that if there was kind of no resources, or if the resources at the emergency room weren't very plentiful, I should say, then they also still have to make a trade-off. So even if this is a hospital setting, if there is limited resources, they still have to make the same trade-offs that they make in natural disasters or big accidents. Yeah, hope that answers that question. Okay, and we have another question. Do hospitals end up getting sued a lot because of these kinds of triaging decisions? That is a really interesting question that I'm not sure I know the answer to. Yeah, that is an interesting question to kind of think about. But I'm not sure if anyone else knows the answer to that one. Because triaging is so inherent to a lot of hospitals and emergency rooms. I'm not sure that, that people kind of sue after that process. I guess people do sue if in cases where they kind of wait really long for care and they don't get the care that they need and they feel neglected, or even end up passing away from their conditions because they weren't seen by medical staff. But yeah, I guess in that case they can also sue, but I'm not sure if, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if that's inherently tied to triaging, but oh, we have an article from Davina. Yeah, check out that article. That looks interesting. Yeah, so my hair says hospitals actually get sued quite often. That is true. It's extremely uncommon, but it can happen. So yeah. Oh, okay. So I guess lawsuits do happen, but lawsuits citing triaging are very uncommon. I guess there are many lawsuits that don't cite triaging exclusively. We have this comment. I don't agree with this type of lawsuits because doctors try their best to make them survive, of course. Yeah, that is true. And if this is future MDs, so this is kind of the types of decisions that you might be faced to make in the future. And it's kind of, the patients are kind of trusting you and putting their health in your hands in this case. So it's your job to really reason with, or have that kind of critical reasoning to, yes, try your best to make them survive in your kind of triage decisions. Yeah, hospitals get a lot of lawsuits. All right, so if there's any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but that's about it. So thanks everyone for going through all of that. Hope you got something out of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. And for any of you that would be interested in kind of walking through that workshop again, if you forget what the difference is between a red tag or an orange tag is, we'll be uploading his workshop. It's actually already in our Google Drive. So if you want to go check that out, Alex's workshop is there. Again, thank you for taking the time to present that to us today. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Luckily for us, Mahira has already recorded her wet lab skills workshop, and it's also in our Google Drive as well. It's the first part of the session 5 resources. So you can watch her video there. That will be uploaded. You can walk through her wet lab skills. And we do apologize. We ran a little bit low on time today, but again, all the information was incredibly helpful. So we are glad that there was a lot of information that everyone was able to learn today. And just a quick reminder that in an hour and a half, I don't want to say what time it is because everyone lives in a different time zone because you're all international participants. So in exactly an hour and a half or an hour and 40 minutes, we're having office hours. So feel free to stop by if there's anything you have questions on, whether it be your research symposium or just anything that you have questions on in general and you want to talk to one of us or just talk to one of us one-on-one to, get to know us. It's really for anything. There's no general set purpose. That's why they're just called office hours. So feel free to stop by. The link is in your program itinerary, so you can check that out. We have 2 posts up on Instagram, so be sure to check those out. Enter the giveaway, our summer program one that you're all eligible for because you're all summer program participants. So be sure to check that out. Be sure to fill out the week 2 homework form too. So we have week 2 homework as opposed to post-session homework for this week. We just have 1 form for you to fill out before next Monday. And that's your second to last piece of homework. So make sure you get that done. So yeah, just fill out the thank you form for the guest speakers, check out the 2 posts, come to office hours, fill out the homework form. And I think that is it. Oh yeah, and please be sure to check out the research symposium document again because you guys have been asking us some questions, and as you ask questions, we've been adding more information into the doc to hopefully clear some things up. So thank you, Jada, for reminding me about that. But if you don't have any questions, you're more than welcome to head on out. We'll see you Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Be sure to, have your camera on because we're going to be taking a group picture. So we want to see all of your beautiful, beautiful smiles, and that picture will be sent out to all of you at the conclusion of the program. So we will see you all on Tuesday for our very last session, which is crazy because it feels like this program just started. Yeah, bye everyone.
Thanks guys. Thanks everyone. Thanks Ravina.
Bye. All right, so I don't see anyone that has any questions. So we're going to start